What it feels like to be 88. I'm 88 years old. I say that slowly now because it deserves to be said slowly. 88. I've lived long enough to watch the world change its clothes several times, long enough to see words lose their meaning and new ones appear out of nowhere. Long enough to bury people I thought I would grow old beside. Long enough to realize that time doesn't end with a bang. It ends with a long, quiet narrowing. Most mornings, I wake up before the sun, not because I want to, but because my body doesn't remember how to stay asleep. There's a moment just before my eyes open where I forget who I am and how old I am. That moment is peaceful. Then memory rushes back in, gently but firmly, like a hand on the shoulder saying, "No, this is where you are now." I lie there for a while. I don't rush anymore. There's nothing chasing me, no meetings, no deadlines, no one waiting for me to be somewhere. That's a strange thing to admit because for most of my life, being needed was how I measured my worth. Now the absence of that need is both a relief and a wound. The house is quiet, not the peaceful kind of quiet people talk about when they're on vacation. This is a lived-in quiet, a quiet that knows your name, floors that creak the same way they've creaked for years, a clock that ticks too loudly because there's nothing else competing with it. At 88, time feels thick, heavy. It doesn't fly, it sits with you. It asks you questions you avoided when you were younger, questions you didn't think mattered yet. When you're young, you live forward. Every decision points towards something ahead, a goal, a plan, a future version of yourself you're always preparing to become. You don't spend much time looking back because there's so much road ahead that looking back feels unnecessary, even dangerous. But when you get old, the road behind you becomes longer than the road ahead. Eventually, it becomes all road behind you, and you can't help but look. I didn't expect memory to behave this way. I thought I'd forget more than I remember. Instead, I remember the wrong things, not the accomplishments, not the awards or milestones. Those blur together. What stays sharp are small moments, ordinary moments I didn't know were important when they were happening. A sentence someone said in passing, a look that lingered half a second too long, a door closing softly instead of slamming. Those are the things that come back. Sometimes I'll be sitting in my chair, staring at nothing in particular, and suddenly I'm 25 again, standing in a room that no longer exists, talking to someone who has been gone for decades. The memory feels so real that for a second my body believes it's happening now. Then it fades, and I'm left with the ache of realizing I didn't understand the moment when it was mine. People talk about regret like it's dramatic, like it's a loud emotion, like it crashes into you all at once. That hasn't been my experience. Regret is quiet, it's patient, it waits until you slow down enough to hear it. For most of my life, I was moving too fast to listen. I wasn't reckless. That's important to say. I didn't destroy my life with one terrible decision. I didn't gamble everything away. I didn't walk out on my responsibilities. If anything, I clung to them too tightly. I believed responsibility was proof of character. I believed sacrifice automatically meant virtue. No one tells you that you can sacrifice the wrong things. I wake up now and my body reminds me of its limits. Knees that ache for no reason, hands that don't grip the way they used to, a heart that gets tired faster than my mind does. Aging doesn't feel heroic. It feels administrative, managing pain, managing energy, managing the day so you don't use too much of yourself too early. And yet, even with all that, the hardest part of being 88 isn't the physical decline. It's the emotional inventory, the constant accounting of what remains and what doesn't. Most of the people who knew me when I was young are gone. That's a sentence you don't really understand until you can say it honestly. It means there are versions of you that no longer exist anywhere except in your own memory. No one left remembers the sound of your laugh back then. No one left remembers how you moved, how you spoke, what you worried about at night. That's a lonely realization. I don't feel lonely all the time. I want to be clear about that. Loneliness isn't constant misery. Sometimes it's just the awareness that if you disappeared tomorrow, the ripple would be smaller than you once imagined. At a certain age, you stop being someone's emergency contact. You stop being someone's first call. You become someone people mean to check on. I don't blame anyone for that. Life moves forward. It's supposed to. But knowing something intellectually doesn't make it hurt less when you feel it. I spend a lot of time thinking now, not in a philosophical way, just remembering, replaying, wondering. The mind, when given enough quiet, starts opening old drawers you thought were empty. I remember believing I had plenty of time. That's probably the most dangerous belief a person can have, not because it's false, but because it feels so true when you're young. At 25, a year feels like forever. At 40, it feels manageable. At 60, it feels fast. At 88, it feels like something that barely exists at all. Days still pass, but they don't stack the way they used to. They feel thinner, lighter, more fragile. I used to think old people exaggerated when they talked about how fast life goes. I used to smile politely and think, that won't be me. I was wrong. It is me. And it sneaks up on you. One day you're making plans. The next, you're measuring time in doctor's appointments and anniversaries of loss. I don't tell this story because I want to be remembered. That ship sailed a long time ago. I'm telling it because there's a kind of honesty that only comes when you're no longer auditioning for the future. I'm not trying to impress anyone now. There's no image left to maintain, no reputation to build, no ladder to climb. What's left is truth, stripped of usefulness. When you reach this age, you stop asking, what should I do next? And start asking, what did all of that mean? And that's not an easy question. I look around my home and see objects I once thought were important, papers I saved, things I bought, evidence of a life lived responsibly. And yet, none of it answers the question that keeps returning. Was I present enough? That question didn't matter to me when I was younger, or maybe it mattered, but not enough to change how I lived. Presence doesn't feel urgent, it doesn't shout, it doesn't demand attention. It waits quietly to see if you'll notice it. I didn't, not often enough. Sometimes I imagine my younger self sitting across from me now. He looks tired, but determined. He thinks he's doing the right things. He believes effort will be rewarded later. He believes love is patient. He believes there will be time to slow down. I don't feel angry at him. I feel protective. He didn't know what he was trading away. That's the thing about youth. You don't feel like you're making trades. You feel like you're investing. You assume everything you give up now will come back with interest. Some things don't. At 88, there are no redo buttons, no alternative paths to explore. There's only acceptance. And acceptance isn't peaceful in the way people imagine. It's steady, it's sober, it's learning how to live with the full shape of your life, not just the parts you're proud of. I don't wake up wishing I could start over. That kind of wishing is exhausting. Instead, I wake up wishing I had understood sooner what I understand now. That understanding didn't arrive all at once. It came slowly through loss, through silence, through the absence of voices I once took for granted. Old age doesn't teach you new lessons. It clarifies old ones you ignored. I sit here now, aware that my time is limited in a way it never was before, not abstractly, not someday, but realistically. My body tells me that. The world around me tells me that. The shrinking circle of people tells me that. And with that awareness comes a strange responsibility, not to fix anything. That's no longer possible, but to tell the truth while I still can. This isn't a warning. It's not advice dressed up as wisdom. It's simply what it feels like to be at the far end of a life you once thought would take longer. If you're listening to this, you're still in motion. You still have days ahead of you that feel endless. I remember that feeling. It felt solid, reliable, permanent. It wasn't. Part 2. The life I thought I was building. I was. When I was younger, I didn't think of my life as something fragile. I thought of it as something sturdy, like a structure I was carefully assembling piece by piece. I believed that if I chose the right materials, hard work, discipline, reliability, it would stand on its own long after I stopped paying attention to it. At 25, I didn't feel young. I felt late. That's something I wish more people talked about. Youth doesn't always feel like freedom. Often it feels like pressure, like a clock already ticking too loudly. I looked around and saw people moving ahead of me, or at least appearing to. They had clearer plans, better jobs, more confidence. I thought the feeling of being behind meant I needed to speed up. So I did. I worked more hours than I needed to, not because anyone forced me to, but because it gave me a sense of direction. Work had rules. You did the task, you got the result, you showed up, you were rewarded. Life outside of work didn't offer that kind of clarity, and I didn't trust it as much. I told myself I was being responsible, that I was doing what adults were supposed to do. I wasn't chasing pleasure or distraction. I was building something. That word mattered to me. Building. It implied progress. It implied permanence. What I didn't realize was that while I was busy building a future, the present was quietly passing without me. My days had a rhythm. Wake up early, get ready quickly, eat without tasting, commute thinking about what needed to be done, come home tired, sit down without really arriving. I thought exhaustion was proof that I was doing something meaningful. People around me adjusted to that rhythm. They learned when not to interrupt. They learned how to get my attention efficiently. They learned which conversations could wait and which ones I didn't have the patience for. I didn't notice that learning happening. It was subtle. It felt natural. It felt harmless. I remember thinking that relationships were sturdy too, that if you didn't actively damage them, they would hold. That love was something that could survive neglect as long as there was no betrayal or cruelty involved. I was wrong about that. Love doesn't disappear because of one bad act. It fades because of many small absences, because of postponed conversations, because of promises that weren't broken exactly, just delayed long enough to lose their meaning. There were moments when I sensed something was off, a look that lingered too long, a question asked twice, a quietness that wasn't peaceful, but I explained those moments away. I told myself everyone felt tired, everyone felt distracted, everyone felt distant sometimes. That word, sometimes, did a lot of work for me. It let me believe that what I was experiencing was temporary, that once I reached the next milestone, things would settle, that once I proved myself enough, I could relax. The milestones came: promotions, stability, a sense of being established. Each one brought relief, not joy. Relief that I was still moving forward, that I hadn't stalled, that I was still doing what I was supposed to do. But joy didn't arrive with them, and I didn't question that. I assumed joy was optional, something extra, something that would come later when there was time for it. I believed in later more than I believed in now. I remember specific moments now that felt ordinary then, sitting at a table while someone talked to me and I nodded while thinking about something else, being physically present but mentally elsewhere, saying just a minute and meaning it, not realizing how often that minute turned into nothing. The dangerous thing about being dependable is that people stop expecting more from you emotionally. They trust you to handle things, to manage, to provide. And in that trust, there's also distance. I thought being calm and steady was enough. I thought that as long as I didn't cause chaos, I was doing well. I didn't realize that emotional stillness can feel like absence to the people around you. Years passed without any dramatic collapse. That's another thing no one prepares you for. You expect mistakes to announce themselves. You expect failure to be loud. Instead, life just keeps going, slightly thinner each year. The erosion was slow. So slow, I didn't notice it happening. That's what makes it painful to look back on. There was no single moment I could point to and say, that's where it went wrong. There were hundreds of small moments where I chose efficiency over connection. I avoided difficult conversations because I was tired. I postponed honest ones because the timing didn't feel right. I assumed understanding didn't need to be spoken because it already existed. But understanding needs maintenance. Silence doesn't preserve it. Silence wears it down. I didn't think of myself as emotionally unavailable. I thought I was focused. I thought I was disciplined. I thought I was doing what was necessary. And in a way, I was. But necessity has a way of expanding until it fills everything. There were people in my life who wanted more from me than I knew how to give at the time. Not more time exactly, but more attention, more curiosity, more presence. I didn't know how to provide that without feeling like I was falling behind elsewhere. So I chose what felt safer, what felt measurable. Looking back now, I see how often I confused being busy with being important. How often I mistook productivity for purpose. At the time, those things felt interchangeable. Now I know they aren't. I also see how patient people were with me, how long they waited. That's another thing age clarifies. People don't leave at the first sign of neglect. They stay, they hope, they adjust. And when they finally stop trying, it feels sudden to the person who wasn't paying attention. By the time I noticed the distance, it had already become normal. That's what hurts the most. The realization that you trained people how to live without you and then felt surprised when they did. I don't tell this part of the story with bitterness. I understand why I made the choices I did. I was afraid of instability, afraid of falling behind, afraid of being seen as irresponsible or unfocused. I thought I was choosing security. I didn't see that I was also choosing distance. Life doesn't punish you immediately for these choices. It rewards you at first. That's why they're tempting. You get praised, you get trusted, you get seen as reliable. But the cost shows up much later, when the praise has faded and what's left is quiet. At this age, I can see the pattern clearly. Not one mistake, but a direction. A slow turning away from presence and toward productivity. A belief that love could wait. That connection was resilient enough to survive neglect. Some things are resilient, others are fragile in ways you only discover once they're gone. I thought I was building a life, and I did, in a way, but I didn't realize I was also shaping how alone I would feel inside it. That understanding didn't arrive until much later, until the noise faded, until there was nothing left to distract me from the truth. And when it did arrive, it arrived quietly, without asking whether I was ready. That's where the turning begins. Part 3. What I'd say to him now. There's a moment that comes late in life when you understand, not intellectually, but physically, that nothing ahead of you is guaranteed anymore. Not next year, not next month, sometimes not even next week. It's not panic that comes with that understanding. It's clarity, a kind of stillness that feels heavy but honest. That's where I am now. I don't spend my days wishing I could go back. That kind of wishing burns too much energy. And at 88, energy is something you guard carefully. What I do instead is sit with what is already done, with what can't be changed, with what still echoes. There are nights when I wake up and think of people I should have spoken to differently, not grand speeches, just a softer tone, a longer pause, a question I didn't ask because I assumed there would be time later. Later was the lie I told myself most often. If I could sit across from my 25-year-old self now, I wouldn't lecture him. I wouldn't overwhelm him with everything I know now. That wouldn't work. Young people don't learn from lists of wisdom. They learn from moments they're ready to feel. So I'd speak slowly. I'd let the silence do some of the work. I'd tell him that life doesn't break you all at once. It wears you down in places you don't think to protect. I'd tell him that the biggest losses don't feel like losses when they're happening. They feel like reasonable decisions, like trade-offs that make sense. I'd tell him that being tired all the time isn't a badge of honor. It's a signal that something important is being pushed aside too often. I'd tell him that attention is not infinite, that where you place it repeatedly becomes your life, whether you intend that or not. I'd tell him that the people who love you don't need perfection, they need presence, and presence isn't something you give once and then move on from. It's something you return to again and again, even when it's inconvenient. I'd tell him that relationships don't usually end because of one terrible moment. They end because of many moments where nothing happened, where words weren't said, where feelings weren't noticed, where silence did the damage quietly. I'd tell him that waiting to feel ready is how you miss your own life. That confidence often comes after action, not before it. That saying, "I'll do it later," feels harmless. but later is where intentions go to die. I'd tell him that success feels very different when you're old, that no one sits at the end of their life wishing they'd answered more emails or worked a little later every night. They wish they'd listened better, slowed down more often, taken people seriously when they were right in front of them. I'd tell him that loneliness doesn't arrive suddenly in old age. It's built slowly, decision by decision, when you choose being occupied over being connected. I'd tell him that being needed feels good, but being known feels better, and that those two things are not the same. I'd also tell him that he doesn't have to fix everything right now, that this isn't about fear or urgency. It's about awareness, about noticing what you're trading away in the name of progress. Because here's the truth I've learned too late. You don't run out of time, you give it away. You give it away to things that feel important in the moment, to expectations, to routines, to the comfort of staying busy. And one day, you realize you've given away more than you meant to. There are people I loved who are gone now, some to death, some to distance. And with each of them, there's a version of myself that disappeared too, a version that only existed in their presence. When they left, that version left with them. That's something no one tells you about loss. You don't just lose people, you lose who you were with them. At this age, there are no dramatic regrets, just quiet ones. Regrets that surface when the house is silent and the day stretches long. Regrets that don't shout, but sit beside you patiently. I've made peace with many things. Peace doesn't mean happiness. It means acceptance without resistance. It means not fighting reality anymore. I accept that I misunderstood what mattered most for too long. I accept that I did the best I could with what I knew then. And I accept that knowing better now doesn't give me the chance to do better with the same people. That's a hard thing to hold, but it's honest. If you're listening to this and you're young or even middle-aged, I don't want you to feel afraid. Fear closes people. That's not useful. What I hope you feel is alert, just a little more awake to the quiet moments that don't announce themselves as important. Pay attention to the people who are still asking for your attention. They won't ask forever. Pay attention to the moments you rush through without noticing. Those moments are your life, not the things you're rushing toward. I'm not telling you to abandon ambition. I'm telling you not to confuse it with meaning. They can coexist, but only if you're conscious about it. There will come a day, much sooner than you think, when your future feels smaller than your past, when your body slows down, whether you want it to or not, when the world moves on without checking whether you're ready. On that day, you'll want to look back and feel that you were present for your own life. Not perfect, just present. I sit here now, aware that my days are limited, not in a dramatic sense, just realistically. I don't know how many I have left, but I know they are fewer than the ones behind me. That knowledge doesn't make me sad every day. Some days it makes me grateful. Grateful for what I did notice, for what I did feel deeply, for the moments I didn't rush through. Other days it makes me quiet. If this story reaches you at the right moment, maybe you'll pause for a few seconds longer today. Maybe you'll listen a little more carefully. Maybe you'll stay in a moment instead of immediately moving on to the next one. That's enough. I don't need this to change your life. Lives don't change that way. They change slowly, through attention. This is simply the truth as I see it now, at 88, spoken without urgency, without performance, without the illusion that there's still plenty of time. Because there isn't. And that's okay. That's the truth I finally learned.